Hey there, I am Dr. Dave. A short time ago, I did a live classroom on the beginner's guide to species, strains, and varieties of magic mushrooms. It went really, really well, so I'm actually turning this into a podcast episode today. There's a little bit of an intro, so if you really don't want to hear the intro at all, you can go ahead and fast forward about 8 minutes in, but I advise you check out everything because it's a really, really good episode and you really don't want to miss anything at all. Okay, see you on the other side.
Enter the world of magic mushrooms with Microdose U.
Hey there, I am Dr. Dave, Dr. David Maddow, and welcome to our classroom tonight. I really appreciate everybody that's here. It's an awesome group already. The title of our class, or the name of our class, I should say, is Species, Strains, and Varieties of Magic Mushrooms. And I'm going to be bringing, in just a few seconds, I'm going to be bringing my co-host, Dr. Denise Moret, on. You know her. She's been on the other, in the other classes, on the other webinars. And then very shortly after that, we'll be bringing on Janelle Michael Isaac, and she's our guest and our expert tonight to talk about the different species, strains, and anything you want to know about magic mushrooms, because you can ask your questions here, and we're going to go ahead and try to answer as many as we can. Just to let you know, if those of you that are brand new and don't know anything about me, again, my name is Dr. David Maddow. I have been microdosing magic mushrooms for a little over 3 years now, and the reason I began is because I was going through some mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression, and even a little bit more, some remnants of PTSD for some issues that I had. And I tried everything, you know, all the conventional things, talk therapy, pharmaceuticals, all the stuff they tell you to do. And it worked okay. It worked all right, but I didn't just want all right. I wanted my life to be back the way it should be, feeling really, really good every single day. And it's not an overnight fix, but I will tell you, since I began my microdosing regimen, I can tell you every day I feel absolutely fantastic, and my life is as good or probably better than it was when before I started. So that's why we're here. I've dedicated my life now, since it's worked so well for me, I've dedicated my life to helping others and just sharing my story. And I want to make it very clear before we get going that nothing that we talk about, nothing that I talk about, nothing that Dr. Denise talks about, or nothing that Janelle talks about is to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own doctor with your health care. We're just sharing our stories and our experience, but this is not to be taken as medical advice. And also, please be safe and use this sacred plant medicine only in an area where it is legal or where it is decriminalized. We just want you all to stay safe. And we want you just to, we want this to work for you, but we want you to stay safe as well. So having said that, I think I am going to bring on Dr. Denise. Let me see if I can do that. Dr. Denise, make sure you unmute your video and let's see if this works. Welcome, Dr. Denise Moret, my friend, my colleague, my co-host, and probably a lot more. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. You know, I'm always say that I'm so excited. It sounds silly, I repeat myself, but particularly for our webinar class tonight, just the bringing together of your experience, my history and experience, and then the expertise of Janelle, who's also a friend, and just so thrilled to have her here tonight. And for anybody who doesn't know me, I am a doctor of psychology. I've been practicing for over 30 years. And I certainly believe that psychological work helps people. And yet I have known for a very long time, way back when I was in graduate school, that it was really falling far short of the mark. And I've known for a very long time that psychedelics really could potentially heal things, whereas a lot of the psychiatric medications don't heal, although they can be useful. So I've worked in certainly in psychological practice, trauma, depression, anxiety, all of those things. And I've also embraced a more complementary medicine approach where I've looked at plant medicines. And even though, you know, we say mushrooms aren't really plants, but that has included the use specifically of microdosing psilocybin. So, and it has changed my work. It has changed the people I help, family, friends, patients, and it has also changed my own life in terms of my own treating, you know, residual issues that I was having. So just thanks again for having me.
Thanks for being here. And I will say this right off the bat that basically everything I do is I do this from my heart, and my podcast, our private Facebook group, my email newsletter. However, I will say that Dr. Denise Moret and I have gotten together and collaborated, and we have a program for people that just want some one-on-one hand holding. In other words, you want to get started, you just don't know where to start, you don't know what to do, you've got something that maybe something that's a little bit more complex, and you want just some people to talk to and be able to talk to anytime you want, and have a program that we help you through the entire thing. So we do have that available. We're not going to really be doing any kind of commercial for that tonight, but you know how to get me. And if you're interested in that, like I said, it is a paid program. That is not a free program, but it is the people that we've had that have gone through this so far. Basically, it's nothing short of life changing. Everyone that's gone through this has said it's well worth, not only well worth it, but worth much more than they ever thought as they were getting into that. So again, if you're interested, you know how to get me. Just we don't push this on anybody, but there are people out there that we've helped and wanted help, wanted one-on-one. So just let us know. The other thing is, again, before we bring Janelle on, let's test out the chat box. So if everybody could just, okay, got Monica from Louisiana. We got, let's see, Birmingham, Glenn from Birmingham, Boston, Los Angeles, Florida, Nashville, Minneapolis, Portland, Guadalajara, Buenos Dias. That's all I got. Ryan, SLC, baby. Oh, that must be near me somewhere. Michigan, San Diego. Now we're working. Now we got it going, everybody. Okay, sorry about that. So sorry that it wasn't working, but now sometimes we just got to get some kinks out, and I'm going to learn for next time what I did wrong. But okay, I think we're good there. Also, one more thing before I bring Janelle on is I want to thank any of you, all of you who have been on the Patreon page. The Patreon page is a way a lot of people say, well, I want to support you in some way, and we don't really take donations or anything, but the Patreon, well, I'll always take them, but we don't ask for them. But the Patreon page is a way to get to give us a very tiny donation every single month, and for that, in return, you get a very, very small group of premium nakama that basically, when you're there and we're all there, anything gets answered almost right away. We do some premium content for you all, and the way you get there is simply, let me see, if somebody could put this in the chat box, I would really appreciate it. But it's patreon.com/microdose U. And that's microdose U, obviously one word, which is the letter U. Gina from Baltimore, Ryan, woohoo, Kaylee from Mexico. We got a lot of Mexicans here now. This is great. We're international. So whoever just did that spelled Patreon wrong, I'm sorry. It's Patreon. EON. It's there you go. Uncle Hashi got it right. Thank you, Uncle. So there's the link right there if anybody else wants to put it. I really appreciate anybody joining us on Patreon. And again, for your small monthly donation, you'll get us up close, personal, and some really premium content. Dr. Denise just did a really nice video on it like last week, and we got more and more stuff good coming on Patreon. So please join us there if you can. Now, okay, the moment you've all been waiting for, I want to bring on Janelle Michael Isaac. So Janelle, go ahead and unmute. There she is. Ben, before you, Janelle, I'll just bring you on, and what I'd like you to do is just give us a brief introduction about you, what you do, and then we'll get going with some questions for you. And then what we'll do is, once we do that, we'll open it up for questions from all attendees, because it's I'd say people asking about different varieties, strains, species, things like that. Well, they're not asking for different species, but people are asking like what type. So we're going to get into all this tonight. It's going to be great. So Janelle, thanks so much for being here. Come on and just say hello and introduce yourself to everybody, please.
Hey everybody. Thanks for coming on tonight to join us. I'm Janelle. I am not a scientist, doctor, mycologist, or anything of that nature. Dave already disclosed all of this. All of my evidence is based on personal experience and, talking to other people about their experiences and a lot of research. So my background, I was a cannabis educator, a teologist, So I had some background working with plants, but I became interested in mushrooms, specifically magic mushrooms, when I was reading the Johns Hopkins study saying that it could aid in the help of treatment-resistant depression, moderate anxiety disorder. So I tried other pharmaceuticals and did not have any luck and was already using medicinal cannabis. So I figured, why not? And when sourcing consistently became an issue, my husband and I decided to start growing them. So we grew them for a while and I was giving them to people and, using them myself to heal. And I found that I was able to essentially heal from most of my treatment-resistant depression, generalized anxiety disorder. Of course, everyone has ups and downs and that kind of thing, but I found that based on my personal experience, I wanted to help other people learn how to utilize them. And much like cannabis, there's a lot of misinformation about mushrooms out there. There's not a ton of good research and studies. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this podcast to come in and answer any questions.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Janelle. Thanks again. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule and being here this evening. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you your first question, but I want to make sure that everybody that's viewing this, if something comes to your mind while I'm asking Janelle a question or while she's speaking, go ahead and make sure you do it in the Q&A box, though. That's very important. That's where we're going to be looking for questions. Just write your question down. We will try our very best to get to as many as possible. Can't promise every single one, but as something comes to your mind, write it down in the Q&A as a Q&A, and we will certainly try our best to get to it. So Janelle, let's just get right started right off the top. We'll be real basic at first. We have some people here that are not experienced at all, and then others who are much more experienced, and anything in between. So let's just start off by, I'm going to ask you, what exactly is a psychedelic mushroom? And then as you give your definition and talk a little bit about psychedelic mushrooms, I'd like you to go into a little bit more depth and talk about the difference between species. And I know some people get these terms kind of confused. That's why I'm going to ask you this: the species, subspecies, strains, varieties. There's so many other things, so many things that people are talking about these different types of mushrooms. So let's make sure everybody's really clear. So go ahead and that'll be a little chunk of a couple questions for you there to get started with.
So great. Psychedelic mushrooms are considered anything that is like mind altering, has psychedelic compounds in it. There's tons of species, there's actually tons of genuses. Most of the hallucinogenic mushrooms fall into the psilocybe family, though. Although we do have other families with different alkaloid groups, like Amanita muscaria is more widely known around the world for its mind-altering effects. It has a rich history in other places. But more commonly, people use psilocybe species because it's more accessible to them. It's more easy to cultivate, and it's found around the world as well. So within that species, there's quite a few psychedelic mushrooms. The psilocybe species or the psilocybe genus has the most of the active alkaloids. So those are primarily the ones that we use. Some of the other ones are actually toxic, so we don't want to use those for microdosing. But the psilocybe species I'm sorry, that's the genus, and the species is cubensis. So within the species psilocybe, there's also a ton of other species of mushrooms. We mostly, like I said, hear about cubensis due to the cultivation, but there's also tons, like the azarescents are up to 4 times as strong as cubensis. They grow naturally. There's also I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing this. It's commonly called liberty caps, psilocybe semilantia. There's also psilocybe cyanescens. There's tamponenses, and they all have varying degrees of the same alkaloids that are mind altering. So that's what makes them different within the same species, cubensis. There's tons of different varieties. people cultivate them, people find them throughout the world, but technically they're all the same species, cubensis, within the genus Psilocybe.
Okay, cool. And I don't remember the exact number, but I've heard that there are like many, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Janelle, but maybe hundreds of subspecies of the. So I'm glad you said Psilocybe because that's also a very commonly mispronounced one. So Psilocybe cubensis. There are a lot of like subspecies. So I want to ask you, what are some of like the absolute most common subspecies that we should all be familiar with, know about, and maybe the names should we should understand, the properties of them. But give us maybe a handful of like the absolute most common ones that we should all know.
Sure. So I have a list here somewhere of um sorry. So cubensis, there's tons, you're right. There's hundreds, and technically, like, people are isolating new ones all the time. And so it's going to continue to grow as cultivation is more of a hobby. So a lot of times these species or these subspecies of cubensis are named based on where they're found growing in the world. Some examples of that popular ones would be like Mazatopec, Burma, Amazonian, Tampinensis. There's a ton, Ko Samoy. Those are all like, oh, Malabar is another big one, named on location they're found in the world. Some of the other more popular ones we see are isolations, like penis envy. That one has a funny name, but it's named due to its phallic appearance. Someone was able to isolate that characteristic and replicate it. So that was named based on that. The other things are named due to the person that grew them, or the person, like Maria Sabina is an important figure in the psychedelic movement. She has a variety named after her. And so they're all describing different characteristics, but some other common ones would be like be positive, hillbillies is becoming kind of more popular. One of my favorite, Jedi Mindfuck, that one's pretty good. There's tons though, and people are naming new ones constantly.
What would you say, or if you had to give us maybe the three or four, if that's fair, the three or four most common? Because I know one you didn't mention, and I hear about this all the time, and it's also I think one that's recommended for people that are starting, golden teachers. So what would be if you had to give like a three or four of your favorite starting subspecies? What would you say?
Well, for starting, you're right. The golden teachers are super popular for starting. And I believe the reason for that is the characteristics they possess. They have a little bit of less of a psilocybin and psilocin alkaloid content, making them a little more of a gentle mushroom or a little more forgiving. Like I could probably take quite of a large dose of a low psilocybin containing psilocybe cubensis and have a more, uplifting, maybe a little more creative, less heavy feeling kind of experience. And so that might be desirable for some people. But I really, it's hard to name certain ones that I think are best because they all share the same active components. I mentioned this one earlier, JMF. That one tends to be pretty potent, and so I like that one personally. Tends to just the amount I typically take with that one, I tend to feel it a little more. It's a little more strong, so a little more euphoric for me based on that. And Enigma, I should mention Enigma. I really enjoy Enigma. It's a mutation, and it's really, really potent and really kind of a beautiful, it looks like it grows in like a coral, almost like a brain structure.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go to my second question, actually, Janelle, just based on how the flow of the conversation is going. And we talk, you're talking a lot, and we talk a lot about the experience that people have based on, like, do you take Enigma or Golden Teachers? And I've certainly experienced the same. And I know that the type, really does have an effect on, what we experience. And we also know that everybody's individual, and we know we're very far from saying, take this medicine, this dose, and it's going to be the same desired effect for everybody. We know that it's not like that. We know research is happening all the time. And yet, I really would be interested if you could speak a little bit about what you do know, because you do know a lot. Like you just started to speak about Enigma and Golden Teachers and that, variety. If you could say a little bit about, you know, do certain varieties, are they kind of more specific, for instance, like for if somebody's dealing with anxiety or depression or trauma or body physical pain, or they're just like, I want to like expand my spiritual experience, etc. If you could say a little bit about that.
Sure. So with that one, again, it's a little difficult because I do think because they all have the same components mostly, it's kind of more like the dose dependent. Like, for example, for like a more spiritual kind of experience, I would say that maybe a little more than a microdose, and you put yourself in a setting where either like you're meditating or doing breath work or doing something beyond just taking a mushroom and expecting to connect spiritually. I like to go in the forest personally, to take them and have like more of a spiritual experience in nature. So something like that, or if you're looking for like anxiety relief or depression relief specifically, they found there's a microdosing institute protocol they found works best, which is dosing every other day. Or say you're looking for focus, adding something like lion's mane, I think can be helpful versus like the type that you pick, because I think they all have the beneficial components just in varying levels.
Thanks for that. And the key thing that I just heard you say was that it's dose dependent more so. And I think that that's a very important point, that you could, as you mentioned just a few minutes back, that you could take a lot more of Golden Teachers than you would of, the other, say, more potent, varieties. So I just have two other quick questions, and maybe we sort of take them together. But the role of alkaloids, you said active alkaloids, and that's really a very key point that I wanted to just ask if you could just say a little bit more about that, and kind of the significance of it, just a little bit. We don't have to have a chemistry lesson, but
Sure, absolutely. So, in terms of the alkaloids, the active alkaloids that are found in all Psilocybe cubensis species, every subvariety of that, they all contain psilocybin, they all contain psilocin, they all contain baeocystin and something called norbaeocystin. And then some of them have minor alkaloids called arugonesin and bufinin. Or buferin, I'm sorry. But most of these alkaloids, when they are metabolized by the body, they all convert to psilocin, as far as current studies show. There aren't many current studies on like the alkaloids, the minor ones themselves, the baeocystin and norbaeocystin, or the other minor alkaloids. There aren't any studies that individualize their effects. They may have some role in modulating and interacting with synergy or whatever with the psilocybin and psilocin, but as far as science tells us right now, they're all digested and metabolized into psilocin, including psilocybin. So it's interesting because we hear more about psilocybin because it's a much more stable alkaloid to work with. It's more, it doesn't oxidize as quickly. It's easier to synthesize. And so we read and we hear much more about psilocybin, but they all convert to psilocin as far as we know. So.
Great. Thank you. And I like that you just mentioned the synthesized. A lot of the research, I'll just mention really quickly, we know a lot of the research uses synthesized as opposed to like, what we're all using necessarily. And then the final quick question was really about like how easy is it to grow, your own mushrooms? Would you recommend it to someone to do that on their own?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Just really quick, getting back to the synthesize. The reason that they work with synthesized psilocybin is because it's much easier to measure the potency, because they can vary up to 4 times. So it's hard for it to be as consistent unless you're synthesizing it to have like a measurable amount every time for a consistent result. But okay, then going back to growing mushrooms, I definitely encourage anyone who has any interest in growing to get into it. I know some people just are like, that's not my thing. I won't necessarily say it's easy. It is kind of involved. There's definitely a process. There's several different processes. You can find one that you really like, or you can find ones that you want to make modifications on and stuff. But there's a ton of info out there. And I think overall, being able to grow your own medicine and have like a relationship with the things that you're consuming to like help you. And I think that's really magical, pardon my pun, but I definitely encourage anyone to get started growing. And I can even name off resources if anyone needs any for that. Like for starters, shroomery.org is a really good website for information. I personally like Peter McCoy's book, Radical Mycology. It has tons of information in there. There's some great Facebook groups, including Microdose U. That one's not growing focused though. Ladies of Mycology, if you happen to be a lady or identify as a female. Or there's a Wombat Labs group I'd mention if you're male identifying or female. And both of those groups, they have spores, they have tons of experienced and inexperienced people. So
Thanks so much, Janelle. And before we're getting in a couple seconds, we're going to get into questions. We have a bunch of questions. So if anything came to your mind, please make sure you put them in the Q&A box. So, because it looks like a couple of you have actually started asking questions in the chat. If you have, you can leave it there. I'll dig it up. I'll find it. But please put your questions in the Q&A box. But Janelle, before I take the first question, is there anything at all that we missed or that you want to just mention before we get into the Q&A from our audience?
I always like to encourage anyone to get involved in decriminalization efforts locally, nationally. There's still far too many people that are, I could go off about the war on drugs and how it's failed us, but I think being an advocate when you can be for psilocybin is important, and also like getting involved to decriminalize locally, especially if it's not legal or decriminalized where you're at.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I like that a lot. So everybody listen to Janelle and do what you can, because we're kind of at the beginning of this. The world is changing now, and for the better as far as psychedelics, and they've just helped so many people with especially with mental health struggles. It's just such a shame to know that you could really get in trouble if you're in an area that's not legal. It's kind of sad, but we won't focus on that right now because we have a bunch of questions for Janelle. I'm going to start off with Therese has actually 2 questions, and the first one, she wants to know if you can show pictures of various types of species of mushrooms. Now, I don't know if you're set up for that, if you want to do a screen share, Janelle, but something, just keep that in your mind. If you could do that in a little, maybe not this second, but if you can maybe work it in at some point, that would be pretty cool just to show a few pictures. But her main question is actually, she said, my orchard where I live has at least 20 different looking types of mushrooms. How can I tell the difference between toxic or psilocybin or psychedelic mushrooms?
You're saying like locally, like for foraging, you're looking to tell the difference, or
It looks to me like the question where she lives, where she lives. There's many different types of mushrooms just growing where she lives, and she wants to know
gotcha.
how she can tell the difference between like a psychedelic, maybe just an edible mushroom in general, or something that might be toxic and be very dangerous.
So my recommendation for that, I don't have any like photos prepared, but I can share my Instagram link if you want. And I do share different photos of mushroom grows on there. But as far as identifying mushrooms, you definitely want to be able to properly identify them before you ever consider consuming them. And so I'm glad you asked, like, where do you get that information? Depending on where you live, there's tons of local guidebooks often that you can buy for identifying local edible and inedible mushrooms. And then just going out and, trying to identify what you found. Sometimes, there's lots of characteristics. If you're taking a photo of a mushroom to identify, make sure you get a picture of the top of the cap, the underside where the gills are, any kind of features it has, because they have a lot of properties. And even taking a spore print is sometimes required to properly identify them. So besides books, there's tons of also Facebook groups for local identification things. I'm a part of ton in Michigan. I went to a class recently about like foraging and which mushrooms are edible, and it's one of my big hobbies too. So like I'm into that thing, but like you learn a lot about them by just becoming proactive and trying to figure it out. Like, what is this thing? Can I eat it? Yeah. So some of them you can, and they're delicious, but you have to be careful.
You have to be careful. Denise, before you ask your question, because I know you're ready with one, I will add to that Sherry wrote in the chat box, there's an app called Picture Mushroom that will tell you what kind of mushroom it is when you take a picture of it. Now, I personally have no experience. I can't say it's good or bad, but it sounds pretty interesting. So you might want to take a look at that app called Picture Mushroom as well.
Just Just a side note though, because there's so many features of mushrooms, and like I said, sometimes even a spore print is necessary for a positive ID. I don't always trust those apps. I've seen them misidentify things that I know. And so some of them can be good. I personally kind of like iNaturalist for that. It's usually pretty on, but again, I wouldn't like trust it.
So I did want to, there was a question about could we list all those growing sources again? So I'm going to say after the webinar, everybody's going to get an email that's going to have a lot of that information. And I think that's probably an easier way to have it as opposed to just saying it and people are trying to scribble it down. So it's pretty easy to find some of those things that you've mentioned. So there was a question about how does someone begin to advocate, and I'm a strong advocate, and you can get very active in your state. It's more of a state by state thing at this particular point. There are some federal things. Our current president actually, and the FDA, for whatever that's worth, are certainly advocating for fast tracking approval because it has revolutionized the treatment of so many treatment resistant depression, as you mentioned, Janelle, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if you want to advocate, I know what I did in New York, there's a mental health advocacy group as a doctor, in New York, I could sort of join that. I could support that. There are often senators, congressmen, politicians. If you do a little clicking around and Googling, you'll probably find exactly, where to get connected and support those groups. There were lots of really great questions. So one was, could you say specifically about a more, especially for people trying to grow on their own, like the most, the easiest, the least troubling, the question was, what's the most mold resistant, contamination resistant that someone would want to start with?
Okay, so that can be an issue with mycology is contamination. And so you want to make sure you're getting your genetics from somebody who works in front of a flow hood, has, clean genetics, works on agar to clean up their genetics to make sure there's no contamination. And so buying them from a trusted source is the best. And for me, starting out, I know I had a huge success with a random strain, Alicabenzi. I purchased that randomly and I had a lot of success growing just big monotubs of it. And so if you're looking for bulk, I thought that was a good experience. I've also had good luck with B positive as a strain. That one's known to be pretty resilient. And so yeah, that and just, be sterile in everything you're doing around them as much as possible. I would personally avoid Uncle Ben Tech or any of like the kind of cheap methods to grow mushrooms. I see a lot of those, and just stick to a sterile process.
Thanks. Fantastic. I'm going to read this one because I want to make sure I get it. So it looks like a pretty cool question from Monica. And even though she said she came in a little bit late, are there different side effects from one strain to the other? So, in other words, she says, I will reduce the amount when I feel it coming on strong, but it almost feels like one strain may relax me, one takes me to the past every time, and so on. So, just different feelings with each. So, is this a common subject that comes up with microdosing? Strain to strain, or if you want to call it subspecies, it doesn't really matter, but different side effects or different effects.
So I did an experiment when I started growing, because I had access to a couple different varieties at the same time, and I was kind of curious. I was like, oh, let me see if I can figure out which one's good that makes me feel creative, which one makes me in a good mood, like which one does this. And so I went down that avenue, and I was trying to document everything, and I found that, I found one variety like, oh, this makes me feel a little creative and uplifted. It was Rusty Whites, in case anyone's wondering. And I would take that, and then I'd take it for like a few days in a row, and then I'd have a different effect. I would notice like, hey, I don't really feel creative today, but maybe it's because my day is different, or maybe I'm in a different mood to start with, or, I started to notice that my set and my setting, or like your mindset and your environment, had a little more to do with my experience than the type of mushroom that I was consuming. There are differences, of course, in the different ones, but like I was saying, I think it's mostly due to the different psilocybin and psilocin content. As of right now, there's not any studies that exist that pinpoint certain effects due to the minor alkaloids, or which would be, slightly different in different varieties of the same strain or the same species, cubensis. So I'm not saying that they can't have different feelings. I just, according to my personal research and according to the science that exists, there's not really any known correlations.
And everybody's different. Everybody's different, and different strains and species, well, subspecies and varieties act differently for different people. So let's keep that in mind.
There's one other thing too, that it's not just even the genetics that are affecting the experience. It can be, how the mushroom was grown, how it was dried, how it was stored, how old it is, the method that you consume it. So all of those things can also be factors. There's a ton of factors.
Yeah, factors is key. And, I heard Paul Stamets say, like, we're so far from being able to say this mushroom, we've talked about this before, I mentioned it earlier, that it's hard to do that. And because I don't know if we'll ever be able to say, take this much and this is going to treat that, or you get that desired effect, because of all the factors you're mentioning, Janelle, because you could take something and then a couple of days later it's going to have a different sort of effect, because everyone's unique and there can be so many layers, which is why we talk about all those different factors and layers. There was one question, I'll just kind of quickly answer it if you want to chime in here, that about studies on brain health, mental health, like connected to psilocybin microdosing. And there are lots of studies on that. And it's very positive, actually. The idea that it's dangerous, that's why it's illegal, all of that is sort of a myth. So it is extremely, there's lots of studies on that. In fact, people with strokes and them healing, and Parkinson's, and people doing better with a lot of neurological disorders, because, we really have to remember that mushrooms are very, there's a lot of wisdom, and they really can do a lot. I mean, I always say if they can eat plastic, they can help us. There was a question about, actually, I'll ask you two questions, even though they're not related, but the dried versus fresh. And then the other one was, you've mentioned the preference. Somebody asked a question about the preference for Melmac. So two different questions, but together, even though they're not related. Like, is it important to do dried versus fresh? What would be the difference? And then, second unrelated question, your preference statement about Melmac.
Gotcha. So dried versus fresh, when you're consuming a fresh mushroom, which I think are actually quite delicious. I'm not a fan of the dried mushroom taste, but the fresh ones, if you put them on like a salad or something, they're awesome. They contain a lot of water weight though. And so they say that when you dry it, you're losing about 90% of the water weight. And so your dose is just going to be different as a result. Fresh mushrooms are also higher in psilocin. And so you might have kind of a different experience because by drying the mushroom, you're converting a little bit of the psilocin, you're losing that, it oxidizes. And so the fresh mushroom might have a different experience. But from my understanding, the rough conversion is like, say you're going for a 1 gram dose. You're trying to dose for 1 gram of dried weight. Say you're familiar with dried weight. So that means that you would be taking 10 grams fresh, would be like the 90% loss to equal about 1 gram dried. So it's, you know, it's different, and it might be a little more intense, like I said, because of the psilocin difference. As far as Melmac goes, personally, I'm a big fan of that. It tends to be somewhat potent, all things considered, compared to lots of other cubensis, and it's a really fast grower for us. It has huge yields, and so it's been a preference for me, both to grow it and to take it, and I feel like it's just been kind of consistent. So
I will give Glenn a double because he asked two questions that are somewhat related. Well, they're not, maybe not related, but we'll give him two because they're both fairly short. So Glenn asks, first of all, what is the best way to store dried mushrooms, and how is the potency of the mushroom affected by the time it's actually stored? And his second question is, do you find some species easier to grow than others, and which species do you find have the most difficulty growing, and what are the problems you encounter?
okay, so for drying mushrooms, storing them, it's best to store them away from air, away from moisture, away from heat, away from light. And so for me, that means like we vacuum seal them, and we put like the desiccant packs in with them to absorb any relative moisture. And then we put them in a dark closet. And that's kind of been the mode. And as far as potency loss, the more they're exposed to air, the more they're going to lose their potency. And so basically, if you're keeping them stored away, I've had mushrooms that still seem as potent like a year later. Mostly I don't sit on mushrooms that long, but I've done experiments for like, well, let's see. Or I've eaten like an old chocolate that I have, and it still seems to pack a punch. So yeah, so I think that's storage issues. Growing, as far as growing goes, species wise, cubensis I do think are the easiest. We've tried to do some wood loving species like the cyanescents that grow outdoors, and they eat wood chips instead of grain like cubensis, so they're a little different. And I have not really had success there. So I think cubensis have definitely been the easiest. Although we have done tamponenses as well, which are like a truffle mushroom, and that seemed about similar. It didn't really seem harder or easier. But we've also grown like lion's mane and oyster and stuff like that, and they just require different techniques is mostly it. So it's, you know, if you're used to sticking to one technique like cubes, we grow cubes because that's, you know, what's easiest. So
Great. So these are questions I really have no idea about, and maybe you do. So there was a question about what's your opinion about Oak Ridge mushrooms? I've never even heard of that. Have you? And do you have an opinion?
I'm guessing it's a mushroom company of some sort, but I'm not familiar with them. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then I'll just sort of sneak in the second question, which is also about, you know, like if you're, and you sort of spoke about this in identification, and it's really important, I know, for people to never take chances. Absolutely. You see something, you think it's this, you think it's this, and it can look like so many different things. I know Paul Stamets is really an expert on this, and he talks a great deal about it. And, you know, he offers a 6-month course on this actually that you could take. And so there was a question though, like, how to tell the person had a lot of the brain structure mushrooms on their property, and Oak Ridge is from Oak Ridge. It's a mutated mushroom grown. Okay, somebody answered that in the chat. Thank you. So the other question was about, you know, that the person's property has a lot of brain structure mushrooms, and how could they tell if it's enigma, you know?
So Enigma doesn't grow outdoors. It has to be cultivated. It doesn't actually drop spores. It's a mutation. So that one actually has to be kept alive by live tissue culture. And so it's kind of like a legendary variety in the mushroom community because that same live tissue culture is passed around to different growers, and it's gifted, you know, as like, hey, you're doing things right in the mycology world. Here's Enigma, or, you know, that kind of a thing. So I would 99.9 guess any outdoor mushroom growing is not Enigma. Enigma also has it's albino and it's very blue bruising. So if it looks like a albino icy white blue, like blue brain, maybe, but it wouldn't survive outdoors in most of the, I don't know, it wouldn't be able to breed and live outdoors is what I'm saying. It can't reproduce itself.
Here's a question that I know you can answer then, Janelle. And the question is, how do we properly take a spore print?
Ooh. So spore prints are really cool. You can do it even with non-psychedelic mushrooms just for fun and art or whatever. But you would I when I started doing it, I would use tinfoil. Now we use little glass petri dishes. But you can use tinfoil and just lay like a square of tinfoil out, and then you want to cut the stem off the mushroom. And so you just have like the cap with the gills, and you set it gill side down, and then they say to put a bowl over it, the top of it, because then the mushroom will kind of create its own humidity in there and do its thing. And I would say to leave it, I've always left it overnight, but I'd say maybe like 12 hours or so would be a proper, you know, time for it to release its spores. And then you pick up your mushroom and you have a little spore print on that tin foil. And if you're looking for this tinfoil spore print to be sterile, you're going to want to take the spore print somewhere where it's not drafty. You know, I shouldn't say sterile because it's exposed to the air. It's not, but then you can fold the tinfoil back over it and kind of keep it a little more protected that way. Oh, I should say too that the mushrooms have to be like mature. Like not every mushroom is ready for a spore print. When the veil breaks and then like the mushroom starts to, you know, come upwards a little, that's usually a good indication. But the spores will darken too in a lot of different types.
Two questions. One I'm just going to answer really quickly, and then the other one I'll ask you, Janelle. One is the question about the Amanita, a little more specific about the Amanita muscaria mushroom, and that it's supposedly toxic. And I would encourage people to look a lot and read about it. And there's you know, it is something that we're going to actually have another. We've asked Janelle to come back and talk specifically about that particular mushroom, Amanita, which is a different kind of mushroom, but very useful and helpful. So it is known to be toxic, certainly, but it's actually, there's very good use for it and ways to have it that, or, you know, take it and use it that are not toxic. It's very useful, actually. It's something I've really recently explored, and I can say it's very helpful. But we're going to have another webinar on that. So the question is, you know, the proper storage of mushrooms, and do they need to get stored in the refrigerator?
I would probably avoid storing them in the refrigerator. So there's been circumstances where I will. Like say that I'm in a circumstance where I'm not gonna fill the dehydrator and I'm like waiting for more mushrooms, or like I'm not in a circumstance where I'm not ready to fill the dehydrator and I need to delay some time. You can put them in hopefully a paper bag because it won't increase the humidity. And then leave it in the fridge for like a day, or you know, however long to delay it. It'll slow it. But I would not recommend long-term storage in the fridge. Or some people use the freezer, but I would say if you're doing that, just really make sure that whatever you're storing it in is airtight, because it'll get condensation otherwise, and that will zap the potency pretty quick. Oh, and as far as Amanita, yeah, Amanita has different alkaloids. It works on your different parts of your system. And so within the genus Amanita, there are many different species. And so Amanita muscaria or fly agaric, it's like the Mario mushroom. That one contains several alkaloids, one of them being ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid has been shown to be upsetting to the stomach. It can be not so well received in people. And so there's some question as to the toxicity of it. But when dried properly, you can actually convert the ibotenic acid. And so it doesn't make you quite as sick, hopefully. And so, and that's when it can become, have like medicinal properties there. But there are within that same genus of Amanita, there are deadly mushrooms. And so you don't want to misidentify one and end up wrong and dead. So it's definitely important. And there's tons of lookalikes that could make you really stomach upset or sick. And so I think a lot of it's misidentification. I think a little bit of it is a lot of lately it's changing, but I think that we're more mushroom phobic in the USA than we are. There's other cultures that embrace the Amanita and have a rich history of using it. So
let's do this because I know, I think in the original material, I said that we were going to go ahead and also talk about Amanita muscaria tonight. But I think that that really is such an interesting mushroom. And I know, Janelle, with your help, Dr. Denise and I have a pretty good, decent amount of at least beginning experience with it now. And I'd like to really make that a separate class because I think it's something that really deserves a good amount of time to talk about because there are a lot of interesting things about it. Plus, it is legal. It's totally in the United States. I believe it's totally legal. So it's something.
not in Louisiana.
Oh, I didn't
But
know.
I don't know that there's anyone like I was just saying not in Louisiana. It's not legal in Louisiana for some reason, but I don't know that there's anyone really enforcing that.
Okay, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize it was not in Louisiana, but I guess it's pretty safe to say the rest of the U.S. it is legal, and it's such an interesting mushroom that can be used therapeutically as well. So I think that that kind of deserves its own class, which we'll do. If you want to come back, Janelle, and do another one with us at some point, we'd love to do that. We're winding down, so I'm going to go ahead and give. I got another question that I think it's a pretty cool one from Lisa, and it asks a little bit like what you touched on before. Because Janelle, you said that you've had chocolates that you've consumed after at least after a year, and they still seem, from what you said, I took that to mean that they still seem just as potent as day one. I'm a big fan of chocolate. I just think it's easy, it tastes good, and it also it's very easy to store. So, but Lisa's asking, should I keep chocolate in the fridge? Now, I can answer. I personally do not. I keep it just in a cool, dry area, but I don't keep it in the fridge. But what is your feeling? Will that help at all, or not help keeping chocolate in the fridge?
So chocolate, I had mushrooms that were a year old that seemed okay. I've had chocolate that's been like 6 to 8 months old, I think, just for experiment, and that was fine too. But they say that chocolate's actually one of the best ways to like preserve mushrooms because what you're doing is you're coating them so they're not exposed to the air. And the air is like mostly what does the degradation. And so as long as you're storing it appropriately, I again would probably avoid the fridge unless you're sure it's in like a airtight situation, or condensation could still get to it a little bit. Although because there's less actual mushrooms exposed to the air, maybe not as much.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks a lot, Denise. Go ahead. Why don't we do, Denise? Why don't you go ahead and take another question, then we'll go ahead and start wrapping.
Well, I just actually wanted to follow up on what you just said. It was related to a question, but it's sort of it's my question that I'm not going to put in the question and answer because I just ask it, which is about the preserving, and is what I'm about to say true, that it doesn't really, it's not like they'll go bad. Like if you have them and you store them properly, they might not be as potent. But like the sort of contamination, if not stored a certain way, I mean, it is if like there's like if there's moisture, an issue. But like I use those desiccant packets in everything. I don't put anything in the refrigerator. I have powder. I don't use the chocolate, although I'm going to start using chocolates. Um, and so, it does is there any effect or problem storing something with like the desiccant package, those little tiny desiccant things that we all get, and because that sort of removes the moisture and it doesn't really sort of break it down. And then the part two of the chocolate is it, when you're taking it with chocolate, we know that cacao is a bit of a dilation, kind of like it helps with the sort of metabolizing of the, in addition to coating and protecting the mushrooms. So yeah, if you could comment on both of that. I know I threw a lot in there.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the desiccant packs, those are definitely great to store with the mushrooms because they do prevent moisture really from getting to it. Even, if you think it's fine, like your air has the relative humidity in it. And so you have that getting to your mushrooms. If you leave your mushrooms outside of a Ziploc bag for a day or something, you're going to come back and you can bend them because they've absorbed moisture. When it comes to, I didn't really touch on the degradation of potency. I believe there's a few studies saying like within 3 to 4 to 5 months or so, you start to see a little bit of a drop, but there's not like a huge significant drop until a year and then beyond that. And in terms of them going bad, as long as they're kept without moisture, you're right. Like they shouldn't mold or anything as long as they're dry. They should be fine. And then, I'm sorry, your second question, can you remind me?
The sort of role of combining chocolate with
Oh,
taking that, because chocolate is like, a bit of a opening up.
yes, exactly. So chocolate is really synergistic. Um, the Aztecs actually used to have chocolate and psilocybin ceremonies. And so that inspires me when I started microdosing, I was like mixing my microdoses with cacao. And the cacao and chocolate does also interact with the psilocybin. So they're both serotonin agonist, which is why people say like chocolate can put you in a good mood too. And so that has a nice synergy. Cacao is also a vascular dilator. And so I've read what that means in terms of pairing it with psilocybin, that you're increasing your uptake, and like you basically the psilocybin is more accessible to more parts of your body, and the effects tend to last a little longer than if you were not pairing it with something like that that's synergistic.
Perfect. I'll tell you, we've got a lot more questions and we could go on and on probably for hours, but we did promise everybody that the class would be only 1 hour. Then we let you out for Sunday evening to do whatever else you want. But this has been super. It's been incredible. And if you did ask a question and we were not able to get to it, I really apologize. We try to get it to as many as possible. But Janelle, since we have so many questions, and we also want to talk about Amanita muscaria in a separate class, would you like to come back at some point pretty soon and we can do that?
I love Amanita. I would love to talk about Amanita or really any mushrooms for that nature. But especially Amanita. I personally have been using it for years. So, yep, let's do it.
Beautiful. Yeah. Amanita, it would be a great topic. And like I said, Dr. Denise and I just recently started experimenting with it a little bit. And I'm at first I wasn't so keen, but because I had a little weird experience, which we'll talk about on the next class if we do that. But since then it's been to me extremely calming, and I really
Yeah.
talk more about this. So let's do that. So so first of all, I want to go ahead and thank our entire nakama for being here tonight. Anybody that took time out on a Sunday evening, wherever you are in the world and wherever your time zone is, maybe it's not evening exactly, but um, close enough. We really appreciate you being with us. It means a lot for our nakama. And those of you that are brand new to Microdose U, nakama is a word in Japanese. It means kind of like it's a combination of like family, tribe, colleagues, compatriots, people that are all together, getting all together, and we kind of help each other with energy, feed off of each other, and just it's a wonderful thing that we're all together on this. So really means a lot that you guys are all here. Appreciate that a lot. I want to thank Dr. Denise and also, of course, Janelle for coming here. And Denise is usually on the webinars with me, but Janelle this is her first time as a guest, and it just was great. So thanks to both of you. How about if we give each of you like a little bit of a final word? Denise, you go first, and then Janelle. And Janelle, when you give your final word, you can also let people know how to contact you if they have any more questions. So go ahead, Denise, you go first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave, and for having all of this, and Janelle for coming, and everybody. I mean, we have always have such a great number of participants, fantastic questions, and we always encourage people. If your question didn't get answered, certainly reach out to us. And it's ongoing. We're going to have another webinar. Usually, we do it about once a month, so you'll get those announcements. And just so glad for all the information. I found this incredibly informative. So thank you very much, Janelle.
Absolutely. Thank you both, of course, for, entertaining this and putting this on, and, getting hopefully some misinformation kind of dispelled here. And and really my end thing is like, as long as you have safe access to your mushrooms, it doesn't really matter like what strain or what type, or really they're like varieties and isolations of the same thing that has been studied to do the same things. So let's hope maybe more information comes out in the future about the specific minor alkaloids. But until then, keep microdosing with whatever you have safe access to. And you can find me if you have specific questions for me, bluemoodfood at gmail.com, or bluemoodfood2 on Instagram if you want to see some pictures of the mushrooms I grow. Yep.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And again, Nakama, we love you. We couldn't be doing this without you. Otherwise, we'd just be speaking into empty mic and camera, not going anywhere. So we appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks again so much for taking your time out. We will be doing this, as Denise said. We're trying to do one of these a month because they're getting a lot of attention, and people seem to really like kind of the live classroom atmosphere. And Microdose U has some empty classrooms, so we want to go ahead and make these available to you in the evenings. So again, thanks so much. We appreciate it. I'll send everybody an email out that was here, and you'll get to a link to be able to watch this at a future time. And I think that's it. At the end of all my podcast episodes, I say I love you, and I really mean that from my heart. So I'm going to say it tonight. I love you all, and we will talk to you soon. Good night.